In just under 2 hours' time, we should know if the Brexit deal, as it now stands, will go ahead or not. It's also the British Prime Minister Theresa May's last shot at it, and it could go down to the wire. The uncertainty has caused financial chaos, massive divisions in the country and the government itself. Rejection of May's deal could severely hamper trade between the United Kingdom and the European Union and ultimately affect us here in South Africa. Why? Well, we'd have to renegotiate the deals we already have in place. So all eyes are on British lawmakers casting their votes tonight. If MPs vote in favour of Brexit, the UK will remain on course to leave the EU on the 29th of March. But if not, it could open the door to more uncertainty, as UK correspondent Natalie Powell explains.
Brexit continues to polarise Britain, and it's no less divisive among UK lawmakers, who now have to decide on whether to go ahead with or reject the Prime Minister's Brexit proposal. Last month, this same vote was pulled at the 11th hour, when the government realised it would be overwhelmingly defeated.
We will therefore defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow and not proceed to divide the House at this time.
That saw Theresa May receiving new assurances on the deal from EU leaders to try to win over MPs. But the deal itself has not changed.
The text of the agreement is the same text that was published last year. The EU have been very clear they're not in the market for reopening that agreement. The President of the European Commission, several other EU leaders, the Irish Prime Minister, have all said, no, look, this is the agreement that is on the table. We can try and reassure MPs in the House of Commons that certain aspects of it aren't what we want any more than they want, but the text isn't going to change.
Theresa May has repeatedly said that her Brexit deal is the best one available, and the only alternatives would be to leave the EU without a deal or no Brexit at all. But she's also recently faced setbacks at home. MPs, including some of her own, voted in favour of amendments which will force the government to reveal its Plan B strategy within days if the Prime Minister's Brexit deal is rejected. It's clear that a large number of MPs here in Parliament are not in favour of a no deal. But Theresa May's own Brexit proposal is also fairly unpopular. And if it is voted down, well, that means what happens next is left completely wide open.
What needs to happen is the government will have to come back to Parliament and say, OK, you have rejected this deal, here's what we're going to do instead. It might be we're going to try and renegotiate this deal, we're going to try and get bigger changes. It might be we're going to go full steam ahead for a no-deal exit. This is now government's policy. Or it might be something else. It might be, you know, the Prime Minister might resign, the Labour Party could call a no-confidence vote. There's a whole series of sort of different political things that could happen.
Despite warning that attempts by Parliament to block Brexit would destroy faith in politics and democracy, it's expected that lawmakers will reject her deal in this vote. And if that happens, Theresa May's next steps are going to be crucial, with the UK embroiled in a genuine constitutional crisis. Natalie Powell, London.
Now, the uncertainty there has even led to some supermarkets increasing food imports in case the deal fails.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's a mess. I don't know. I don't think anyone really knows. I mean, you don't seem to get the bullet points of what a Brexit deal means and what's actually going to happen. You just hear people aren't happy, or Theresa May wants this, or so. I mean, if I could wake up tomorrow and it was all over, I'd be very happy.
Okay, so that pretty much wraps up the story, and now we know what they feel over there. So why should South Africans care about the outcome of the Brexit vote in Britain today? Tonight we have the economists, Dawie Root of the Efficient Group in our Pretoria studio, and Azar Jamin of Econometrics here in Johannesburg. I always find that a mouthful. They'll help us understand how the vote on Theresa May's deal will impact our economy. Azar Jamin, let me start off with you. I mean, it still blows my mind that we are at this point, you know. How did we ever get here? But here we are. How do you think South Africa is going to be affected? Because whatever happens, we're going to have to renegotiate, right?
We're going to have to renegotiate. I don't see it necessarily all one-way negative. On the contrary, one must bear in mind that South Africa has traditionally been a very important trade partner for Britain. More important than that, The largest source of foreign direct investment in South Africa historically has been British investment, and that's obviously a historical legacy. So the ties between the countries are very, very close. In fact, one might argue that if Britain were to move away somewhat from the EU, they would be seeking closer ties and possibly more investment into South Africa as an alternative to Europe in order to maintain their competitive advantage economically.
So, Davy, do you agree with that? So, possible downsides in some trade negotiations, but otherwise the relationship will save the deal between the two of us.
Yeah, mostly. Although, there is a possibility that we wouldn't need to renegotiate. There is, without a doubt, there's a possible scenario where Britain remains part of the European Union. So there's so much confusion we simply do not know. But I think what is important, perhaps, is to rather try to break up possible scenarios in terms of time. Now, in the short term, it is quite possible that there can be a lot of disruptions especially on the financial markets. And it can either be good or bad. In the case that this proposals by Theresa May is accepted by Parliament, the possibility of a sudden strengthening of the UK pound is quite possible, and maybe the financial markets could react quite positive to that. The possibility of a humiliation of Theresa May, however, and a huge humiliation, may result in a pound coming in even under more pressure, and this is happening in a world environment where the financial markets are not very stable at the moment. In the medium term, that will really depend on whether it's going to be a yes or a no, or what's going to happen, and then we might have to renegotiate something with the UK. And in the longer term, of course, we don't know what's going to happen there, but there certainly is a possibility. But things won't really change. Maybe they stay part of the union.
So what would we look to? I mean, human capital, skills capital, is that what we have going for us here in the relationship going forward?
Well, very much so. And historical ties, cultural ties, trade brand names of British companies. I mean, what strikes one is you go to Britain and you recognize a lot of things on the shelves of shops. You go to the United States and you don't recognize them. That's the kind of difference that you have. And secondly, our cultural ties. There are so many South Africans that are studying in the UK, come back to this country. There is that flow of ideas that between us. Technologically, there's a lot of research done, collaboration between South Africa and UK scientists, engineers, that kind of thing.
And do you think, Darby, that we could fill a void caused by this breakup with the EU, if you can put it like that? I mean, our fruit and veg industry, for example, we take over from Spain and Greece.
Yeah, no, we will simply have to, whatever comes our way, we simply have to try to limit the potential damage on the South African economy, and we just don't know what is going to happen. But I'm afraid this can have some political repercussions, especially in the UK as well. For example, if Theresa May loses a vote of no confidence, that can lead to a general election, and that may eventually lead to a Labour government in the UK, and that may lead to more protectionism in the UK, which will have a negative impact on countries like, for example, in South Africa. But the best that we can do in South Africa is to wait and see what is going to happen, but keep an eye on the financial markets, especially in the short term, because the financial markets can, depending on the outcome and how it happens, of course, but the financial markets can react quite violently.
You want to say something?
Ironically, the financial markets have been doing relatively well in anticipation of Theresa May losing the vote. So, because I think they see that as opening up the possibility of new kinds of negotiations, possibly a second referendum in the UK that might actually see the UK eventually staying within the EU.
I mean, sort of bounding out of that. But I mean, look at the impact that it's already had on the UK. I mean, London was considered as, a financial hub. It sort of lost that reputation. Has it on the, same sort of level as New York?
Without a doubt, yes.
How's it going to climb back from that? And what's the wider impact of that?
I think there'll be winners and losers, and the financial services sector in the UK stands to lose if the UK leaves the EU completely. Much also depends on the kind of arrangement that is reached. And a very important sticking block there is this whole backstop on Northern Ireland and whether they can overcome that.
A dangerous one, isn't
and
it?
the other thing is the free transfer of labour between Europe and the UK. If that comes to an end, there's dire straits. Most studies have concluded that the UK's economy stands to be somewhere between 2 and 5% smaller in 5 years' time than it is currently if Brexit goes ahead.
All right. Yes, I mean, Davy, I suppose Labour, and again, that would possibly suit us, would become more expensive for the UK. What about Cyril Ramaphosa when he goes to Davos? I mean, could he meet up with them there, the trade minister, present a plan?
Yeah, I guess
that's good for us.
Yeah, I think that's certainly going to. That's going to be an agenda at Davos, without a doubt. That and one or two other issues as well. But I think I don't think much is going to happen in Davos because I think it's going to be postponed in one way or the other. But one thing is without a doubt, one thing is very clear here. We don't know who's going to be all the losers. We don't know who's going to be the winners here. But without a doubt, the biggest loser here will be the United Kingdom. They've lost a lot of business already, and many, especially financial companies, have relocated to the continent. They've moved to Frankfurt, or they've even moved to New York as an example, and the UK really painted themselves into a really horrible corner here. The whole thing was mismanaged to such an extent that the damage to the UK economy, it doesn't matter what the outcome eventually is, there will be huge damage to the UK, to the British economy.
So the British economy, I mean, you could say in doldrums, but you'd like to think that they're clever enough to pull themselves out of it.
Well, they're not doing that badly right now, despite everything. The whole point is they could have been doing so much better.
Do you think that there's a chance now that South Africa could say, right, okay, you know, if you could describe it as sort of a colonial model, you don't bring your little outposts here, your businesses, but rather use local business and work closer with us, exploiting our expertise here in South Africa?
Without a doubt, I think there's enormous capacity to exploit the opportunities in so many ways to our advantage. Unfortunately, Britain entering the EU saw South Africa losing some of that edge in terms of relations with Britain and economic advantages. And I'm optimistic that we might just see some of those ties rebuilding again if the government is actually totally supportive of it and doesn't see them as entirely new neo-colonialism.
Right. And Davy, so South Africa might benefit, and Russia's pretty keen on the Brexit vote going ahead. Who else do you think will be looking forward to Britain leaving?
Yeah, we as South Africans, I think we are, economists call it price takers. We can't really influence what's happening in Europe, especially what is happening in, currently there's a bit of a fight between the EU and Britain. We simply have to take whatever is thrown at us and see whatever we can do with that. But there are far more important things that I think we certainly can have an influence over. Like, for example, our relationship with the big, strong, growing economies, like, for example, the Chinese and the Indians. So we should rather try to concentrate on those sort of relationships with those kind of economies and see if we can build it out. The European economies, it's a very big economy, but the European economies are growing at a rate of 1 or 2% or so. There's hardly economic growth there. The German economy could be in a recession soon, but the economies that's really growing are the important ones to us, are the Indians and the Chinese and some other Southeast Asian countries, and even some South American countries.
Prompt us to be more creative then. Davy Rueter and Azar Jamin, thank you very much for the chat. Coming up tonight on the latest episode of Checkpoint, a look at the revenge attacks by warders on prisoners in East London and the Free State. I'll be back with more news at 9.